The morning sun cast long shadows across Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Michael Thompson adjusted his red tunic and checked his ceremonial sword one final time. At 28 years old, he had served in the Queen's Guard for 5 years, standing motionless for hours while tourists snapped photos and tried to make him laugh. Today felt different somehow, though he couldn't explain why. Michael had grown up in a small town in Yorkshire, where his father worked in a coal mine and his mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. The military had been his escape from poverty, and joining the prestigious Queen's Guard had been the proudest moment of his life. His parents had traveled down from Yorkshire to watch his first ceremony, tears streaming down their faces as they saw their son in the iconic red uniform and towering bearskin hat. The palace grounds were already bustling with early morning tourists, even though it was barely 9 o'clock. Security officers moved quietly through the crowds, their trained eyes scanning for anything unusual. The atmosphere was relaxed but professional, as it had been every day for decades. Detective Inspector Sarah Williams was reviewing security reports in her office when the first unusual incident was reported. A man had been spotted near the palace gates 3 times in the past week, always wearing the same dark jacket and baseball cap. The CCTV footage showed him studying the guard rotations, timing their movements with suspicious attention to detail. The man's name was Derek Matthews, a 35-year-old from East London who had fallen on hard times after losing his job at a construction company 6 months earlier. His wife had left him, taking their 2 children, and he had been evicted from his flat the previous month. Living rough on the streets, Derek's mental state had deteriorated rapidly. He blamed the government, the royal family, and society in general for his misfortunes. Derek had spent weeks planning what he called his moment of truth. In his confused mind, attacking a royal guard would somehow send a message to the world about the inequality he saw everywhere. He had purchased a large kitchen knife from a second-hand shop and had been carrying it with him for days, waiting for the right opportunity. Michael took his position at the main entrance gate, his rifle held at the precise angle required by centuries of tradition. The weight of the bearskin hat was familiar now, though it had taken months to get used to when he first joined. Tourists began gathering around him almost immediately, children pointing excitedly while their parents explained the importance of the guards. The morning progressed normally until about 10:30, when Derek Matthews emerged from the crowd of tourists. He had been watching Michael for 20 minutes, studying his posture and the timing of his movements. Derek's hands shook slightly as he felt for the knife hidden inside his jacket. His heart was racing, but his resolve was firm. Sarah Williams received an urgent radio call from one of her officers stationed near the gates. The suspicious man from the CCTV footage had been spotted again, and this time he seemed to be positioning himself closer to the guards. She immediately dispatched additional plainclothes officers to the area and began making her way to the scene herself. Michael noticed the man approaching but maintained his professional composure. Tourists often came close to take selfies or ask questions, despite being told to keep their distance. The man's behavior seemed more agitated than usual, but Michael had dealt with plenty of difficult visitors over the years. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, following protocol. Derek pulled the knife from his jacket and held it low against his leg, hidden from the view of most bystanders. His breathing was heavy, and a sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. In his mind, he rehearsed what he planned to say, some dramatic statement about justice and inequality that he hoped would be remembered. The first person to notice the knife was 8-year-old Emma Peterson, visiting London with her family from Sweden. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed, speaking rapidly in Swedish. Her mother looked and immediately understood the danger, gasping loudly and grabbing her daughter's hand to pull her back. The gasp caught the attention of other tourists, who began to notice the man with the knife moving purposefully toward the guard. Several people started backing away, while others fumbled for their phones to record what they thought might be an interesting confrontation. None of them realized how serious the situation was about to become. Michael's training kicked in as he heard the disturbance in the crowd behind him. He caught sight of the knife in his peripheral vision and immediately assessed the threat level. The man was now only 10 feet away and closing the distance quickly. Michael's mind raced through his options while his body remained perfectly still, a testament to his years of discipline. Derek raised the knife above his head and let out a wild yell as he charged toward Michael. The tourists around them screamed and scattered, parents grabbing children and running for safety. The peaceful morning at Buckingham Palace had suddenly turned into a scene of chaos and terror. Sarah Williams was still 50 meters away when she heard the screams. She broke into a run, speaking urgently into her radio to coordinate the response. Multiple officers began converging on the scene, but they were all too far away to intervene immediately. The next few seconds would depend entirely on Michael's training and quick thinking. Michael had less than 3 seconds to react as Derek bore down on him with the knife raised. Every instinct told him to break position and defend himself, but his training had drilled into him the importance of protecting the palace and maintaining the dignity of the guard under all circumstances. The weight of tradition and duty pressed down on him as heavily as his bearskin hat. The knife glinted in the morning sun as Derek brought it down toward Michael's chest, his face twisted with rage and desperation. Around them, tourists continued to scream and flee, some still recording on their phones in shock. The scene was being broadcast live to millions of people around the world within minutes. What happened next would change both men's lives forever and challenge everything people thought they knew about duty, compassion, and the true meaning of strength. The confrontation that began with hatred would end in a way that nobody could have predicted, least of all Derek Matthews himself. Michael's response in that crucial moment would not only save his own life, but would also transform the life of his attacker in ways that seemed impossible. The story of what truly happened that morning would eventually spread far beyond the palace walls, inspiring people around the world, and proving that even in the darkest moments, humanity and compassion can triumph over violence and despair. The image of the red uniformed guard facing down his attacker would become iconic, but the real story was far more complex and beautiful than anyone watching that day could have imagined. It was a story about second chances, about seeing the person behind the violence, and about the extraordinary power of choosing mercy over retribution when it matters most. As Derek Matthews brought the knife down toward Michael Thompson's chest, time seemed to slow to a crawl. Michael's years of military training took over, his body moving with practiced precision even as his mind processed the surreal nature of what was happening. Instead of stepping back or raising his rifle, Michael did something completely unexpected. He stepped forward. The movement caught Derek completely off guard. He had expected the guard to retreat or try to block the attack, but Michael's forward step put him inside Derek's reach, too close for the knife to be effective. Michael's left hand shot up and grabbed Derek's wrist, stopping the downward motion of the blade just inches from his uniform. For a moment, the two men were locked together in what looked like a deadly embrace. Derek struggled to break free, his face red with exertion and confusion. Michael held firm, his grip strong from years of military training and countless hours of drill practice. The knife trembled between them, catching the sunlight as both men fought for control. Around them, the chaos continued. Tourists screamed and ran in all directions, some falling down in their panic to get away. Parents scooped up children, and elderly visitors were helped to safety by younger family members. The normally pristine palace grounds became a scene of confusion as hundreds of people tried to escape what they thought was a terrorist attack. But something strange was happening in the center of the chaos. Michael Thompson was not fighting Derek Matthews with anger or violence. Instead, he was looking directly into Derek's eyes, and what he saw there changed everything. Behind the rage and desperation, Michael recognized something familiar, the look of a man who had lost everything and felt he had nothing left to lose. Michael had seen that same look in the mirror during his own darkest period, 3 years earlier, when his younger brother had been killed in a car accident. He had blamed himself for not being there to prevent it, and had nearly destroyed his own life with alcohol and self-destruction before his fellow soldiers had pulled him back from the edge. Derek struggled against Michael's grip, but the guard's strength was overwhelming. More importantly, Derek began to realize that despite having him completely at his mercy, Michael was not trying to hurt him. The guard's face showed no anger, no desire for revenge, only a strange kind of understanding that Derek couldn't comprehend. The backup security officers were now close enough to see what was happening, but Sarah Williams held up her hand to stop them from intervening. Something about the scene made her pause. The guard seemed to have the situation under control, and she sensed that rushing in might make things worse rather than better. Michael began to speak, his voice low and calm despite the deadly weapon just inches from his chest. His words were not the formal commands that tourists usually heard from the guards, but something much more personal and human. "I know you're hurting," Michael said quietly, his eyes never leaving Derek's face. "I can see it in your eyes. Whatever brought you here today, whatever pain you're carrying, this isn't going to fix it. Derek's struggles began to weaken as he heard the unexpected compassion in the guard's voice. He had prepared for violence, for arrest, for consequences, but he had not prepared for kindness. The knife wavered in his hand as confusion replaced determination. "You don't understand," Derek gasped, still trying to pull his wrist free. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything. You stand here in your fancy uniform, protected and privileged, while people like me have nothing." Michael's grip remained firm but gentle. "I know exactly what it's like," he replied. 3 years ago, I lost my brother. I blamed everyone, the government, the military, and myself. I wanted to hurt someone, anyone, to make them feel the pain I was feeling. I understand that need for someone else to suffer because you're suffering." The words hit Derek like a physical blow. He had expected resistance, anger, fear, anything but empathy from the man he was trying to attack. His hand began to shake more violently, and, for the first time since drawing the knife, he looked uncertain. Around them, the security perimeter was being established, but the officers maintained their distance on Sarah Williams' orders. She had moved close enough to hear the conversation and was amazed by what she was witnessing. In her 20 years of police work, she had never seen a potential victim handle an armed attacker with such skill and compassion. News crews were arriving on the scene, having been alerted by the initial reports of an incident at Buckingham Palace. Television vans lined the street, and camera crews were setting up their equipment. The story was already breaking on social media, with confused reports of a knife attack and a royal guard in mortal danger. Michael continued speaking, his voice steady and reassuring. "What's your name?" he asked Derek. "I'm Michael. I'd like to know who I'm talking to." Derek hesitated for a long moment before answering. "Derek," he said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. "Derek Matthews. Derek, I want you to know that whatever brought you here today, it doesn't have to end the way you planned. I can see that you're not really a violent person. Something pushed you to this point, but you still have choices. You can still choose a different path." Tears began to form in Derek's eyes as the full weight of what he was doing hit him. The knife felt impossibly heavy in his hand, and the rage that had driven him to the palace began to ebb away, replaced by confusion and shame. Michael slowly began to apply more pressure to Derek's wrist, not to cause pain but to guide the knife away from both of them. Derek offered no resistance, his arm following Michael's direction as if in a trance. "I've got 2 children," Derek whispered, his voice barely audible. "They live with my ex-wife now. She won't even let me see them because I lost my job, lost our home. I thought if I did something dramatic, something that would be on the news, maybe they would understand how much I'm hurting." Michael's expression softened further. "Your children don't need to see their father on the news as someone who hurt people. They need to see him as someone who chose to be better, even when everything seemed hopeless. They need to know that their father is someone who can find his way back from the darkness." The knife continued to move away from Michael's body, guided by a steady pressure on Derek's wrist. Derek was no longer resisting at all, his entire focus on the guard's words and the unexpected kindness he was receiving. Sarah Williams spoke quietly into her radio, updating her team on the situation and preparing them for what appeared to be a peaceful resolution. She had never seen anything like this in her career, and she knew she was witnessing something special, something that would be talked about for years to come. The crowd of tourists had been pushed back to a safe distance, but many were still watching in fascination rather than fear. Word was spreading that the situation was under control, and people were beginning to realize they were seeing something extraordinary, an act of compassion in the face of violence. Michael began to slowly lower Derek's arm, the knife pointing harmlessly toward the ground. Derek offered no resistance, his eyes locked on Michael's face as if he were seeing him clearly for the first time. "Derek, I want you to let go of the knife now," Michael said gently. "Just open your hand and let it fall. You don't need it anymore. You're not that person anymore." Derek's fingers began to loosen around the handle of the knife. Everything he had planned, everything he had imagined about this moment, had crumbled away in the face of Michael's unexpected response. The guard had shown him a different way to be, a different choice to make. The knife fell to the ground with a metallic clatter that seemed to echo across the suddenly quiet palace grounds. As it fell, Derek Matthews collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by emotion and the magnitude of what he had almost done. Michael Thompson, still in his ceremonial uniform, knelt down beside him and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. What happened next would surprise everyone watching and would mark the beginning of an extraordinary friendship that would change both men's lives forever. The confrontation that had begun with hatred and desperation was about to transform into something beautiful and redemptive. As Derek Matthews knelt on the ground beside the fallen knife, his whole body shook with sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. Michael Thompson remained beside him, his red uniform a stark contrast to Derek's torn and dirty clothes, but his presence offering comfort rather than judgment. The security officers began to move forward, but Sarah Williams held them back with a gesture. She understood that what was happening was more important than following standard procedure. This was a moment of human connection that could heal wounds that arrest and prosecution never could. Michael removed his ceremonial gloves and placed his bare hand on Derek's shoulder. The gesture was simple but profound. A trained soldier, sworn to protect the crown, offering comfort to a man who had just tried to attack him with a deadly weapon. "Derek, look at me," Michael said softly. Derek slowly raised his head, his face streaked with tears. "You didn't hurt anyone today. You made a choice, the right choice. That's what matters now." Derek struggled to find words. "I don't understand why you're being kind to me. I tried to hurt you. I wanted to hurt you. You should hate me." Michael shook his head. "Hate won't solve anything. It won't help you, and it won't help me. 3 years ago, when I was at my lowest point, someone showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. A fellow soldier named James Baker saw me drinking myself to destruction and, instead of reporting me or turning away, he sat with me every night until I was ready to get help." The crowd of onlookers had grown silent, many of them recording the extraordinary scene on their phones. News cameras captured every moment from a distance, and the footage would soon be broadcast around the world. But for Michael and Derek, the crowd might as well have been invisible. Derek wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I lost everything. My job, my house, my family. I've been sleeping rough for weeks. I thought if I did something dramatic, something that would be remembered, it would somehow matter. But I see now how wrong I was." Michael helped Derek to his feet, supporting him gently. "You haven't lost everything, Derek. You still have your life, your intelligence, your ability to choose what happens next. Most importantly, you have children who need their father to be the best man he can be." Sarah Williams approached them slowly, her handcuffs visible but not drawn. She had a job to do, but she also recognized that this situation required delicacy and respect for what had just occurred. "Derek Matthews," she said formally, "I'm Detective Inspector Sarah Williams. I need to place you under arrest for threatening behavior and possession of an offensive weapon, but I want you to know that what just happened here, the choice you made to put down the knife, will be taken into account." Derek nodded, understanding. "I know. I deserve whatever happens to me." Michael stepped forward. "Inspector Williams, I'd like to request that Derek be evaluated by mental health professionals rather than simply processed through the criminal justice system. It's clear that he needs help, not punishment." Sarah looked surprised. It was highly unusual for a victim to advocate for their attacker, but she could see the wisdom in Michael's suggestion. "I'll make note of your recommendation, Sergeant Thompson. The courts will consider all factors when determining appropriate action." As Derek was led away in handcuffs, he turned back to Michael. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." Michael watched him go, then turned to face the crowd of reporters who were now pressing forward with questions. The story was already exploding across social media and news networks around the world. Videos of the confrontation and its peaceful resolution were being shared millions of times. The questions came fast and urgent. "Sergeant Thompson, how did you remain so calm? What were you thinking when you saw the knife? Do you consider yourself a hero? Were you afraid you were going to die?" Michael held up his hand for silence. When he spoke, his words were measured and thoughtful. "I don't consider myself a hero. I just saw a man in pain who needed help more than punishment. Derek Matthews is not a terrorist or a dangerous criminal. He's a human being who lost his way and needed someone to remind him that there are always other choices." A reporter from the BBC pushed forward. "Sergeant Thompson, many people would say that Derek Matthews deserves no sympathy after threatening your life. How do you respond to that?" Michael considered the question carefully before answering. "I understand that perspective, but I believe that responding to violence with more violence, or to hatred with hatred, only creates more of the same. Derek made a terrible choice today, but when offered a different path, he took it. That tells me everything I need to know about who he really is." The interview continued for several minutes, with Michael answering questions about his background, his training, and his philosophy about conflict resolution. His calm, thoughtful responses impressed even the hardened journalists who had covered countless violent incidents. Meanwhile, Derek was being processed at the local police station. Instead of the harsh treatment he expected, he found himself being treated with unusual consideration. Word had already spread about what had happened at the palace, and the officers who dealt with him showed a level of respect that surprised him. The duty sergeant, a 20-year veteran named Tom Crawford, pulled up a chair beside Derek's cell. "I've seen the footage of what happened today," he said. "That was quite a guard you encountered. Michael Thompson is his name, and, from what I hear, he's been asking about you, wanting to make sure you're okay." Derek looked up in amazement. "He's been asking about me? Why would he care what happens to me now?" Tom shrugged. "Some people are just built differently. Thompson seems to be one of them. He's also arranged for a mental health counselor to see you, and he's put you in touch with a charity that helps people get back on their feet after losing their homes and jobs." That evening, the story dominated news broadcasts around the world. The footage of Michael Thompson talking Derek Matthews down from violence had been viewed by millions of people. Social media was filled with praise for Michael's compassion and calls for Derek to be shown mercy by the courts. Back at the palace, Michael was relieved of duty early so he could process what had happened. His commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hayes, called him into her office for a debriefing. "Sergeant Thompson," she began, "what you did today was either brilliantly intuitive or completely against protocol, depending on how you look at it. Care to explain your thinking?" Michael straightened in his chair. "Ma'am, I assessed that Derek Matthews was not a trained fighter or a committed terrorist. He was a desperate man making a terrible decision. I believe that showing him a different path would be more effective than responding with force." Colonel Hayes nodded slowly. "Your assessment appears to have been correct. However, you took an enormous risk. If you had been wrong about his intentions, you could have been seriously injured or killed." "Yes, ma'am. But I felt that the risk was worth taking. Sometimes the most dangerous situations require the most unexpected responses." The colonel smiled slightly. "Well, Sergeant, your unexpected response has made headlines around the world. The palace has been flooded with calls from people praising your actions. You've also received a personal message of commendation from Her Majesty herself." Michael's eyes widened. "From the Queen?" "Indeed. She was particularly impressed by your compassion and quick thinking. She's requested to meet with you personally to express her gratitude." As the day ended, Michael reflected on the extraordinary events that had unfolded. What had started as an ordinary morning of ceremonial duty had turned into something that would change not only his life, but also Derek's life in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The real story was just beginning. Derek's journey from desperation to redemption, guided by Michael's unexpected act of kindness, would prove that even in the darkest moments, human compassion can light the way forward. 3 days after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Derek Matthews sat in a small interview room at the courthouse, waiting to hear his fate. The media attention had been overwhelming, with cameras following his every movement and reporters shouting questions about his motivations and his feelings toward Michael Thompson. His court-appointed lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, sat beside him reviewing the case file. She had been practicing law for 15 years, but she had never seen anything quite like this. The prosecution was under enormous public pressure to be lenient, while victims' rights groups argued that Derek's actions, regardless of their outcome, deserved serious consequences. "Derek," Jennifer said quietly, "I have some news that might surprise you. Michael Thompson has submitted a formal letter to the court requesting that you receive treatment rather than imprisonment. He's also offered to participate in a restorative justice program if you're willing." Derek looked up in amazement. "He wants to help me even more? I still don't understand why he cares what happens to me." Meanwhile, across London, Michael Thompson was meeting with Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychologist who specialized in trauma and conflict resolution. She had been studying the palace incident and wanted to understand Michael's motivations better. "Michael, what you did that day was extraordinary," Dr. Foster said. "Most people, even trained soldiers, would have responded with defensive force. What made you choose compassion instead?" Michael thought carefully before answering. "I think it was something I learned from my own experience with pain. When my brother died, I was consumed with anger and wanted to lash out at everyone around me. If someone had met that anger with more anger, I would have spiraled deeper into darkness. But when someone showed me understanding, it gave me a way out." Dr. Foster nodded. "You saw yourself in Derek that day. I saw someone who had reached the end of his rope and was making choices based on pain rather than hope. I couldn't stand by and watch him destroy his life when I knew there was another way." The story of their encounter had continued to spread globally, inspiring countless discussions about forgiveness, second chances, and the power of human compassion. Universities were using the incident as a case study in conflict resolution, and religious leaders of many faiths had praised Michael's actions as an example of true spiritual strength. Back at the courthouse, Derek was called before Judge Margaret Thornton, a stern but fair woman with 30 years of experience on the bench. The courtroom was packed with media representatives and members of the public who had been following the story. "Mr. Matthews," Judge Thornton began, "you have pleaded guilty to threatening behavior with a weapon and attempted assault. These are serious charges that normally carry a custodial sentence. However, this case has several unusual circumstances that I must consider." Derek stood quietly, his hands clasped in front of him. He had prepared himself for prison, but the events of the past few days had given him hope that perhaps there was another path forward. "I have read the victim impact statement from Sergeant Thompson," the judge continued, "as well as letters from mental health professionals, social workers, and members of the public. What strikes me most is not just Sergeant Thompson's remarkable response to your attack, but your own response to his compassion." Jennifer Walsh had submitted evidence of Derek's complete cooperation with police, his remorse, and the positive changes he had already begun making in his life since the incident. A local charity had provided him with temporary housing, and he had started attending counseling sessions. "Mr. Matthews, I am sentencing you to 2 years in prison, suspended for 2 years, conditional on your participation in a comprehensive rehabilitation program including mental health treatment, community service, and regular check-ins with probation services." Derek felt his knees go weak with relief. A suspended sentence meant he would not go to prison unless he violated the terms of his probation. It was a second chance he had never expected to receive. Judge Thornton continued, "I want to be clear that this lenient sentence is not because your actions were excusable, but because I believe that in this case, rehabilitation will serve the public interest better than punishment. You have an opportunity now to turn your life around and to honor the mercy that Sergeant Thompson showed you." As Derek left the courthouse, he was met by a crowd of reporters. For the first time since the incident, he felt ready to speak publicly about what had happened and what he had learned. "I want to say how sorry I am for what I did," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I was in a dark place, and I made a terrible choice. But Michael Thompson showed me that there's always hope, even when everything seems hopeless. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that his faith in me wasn't misplaced." A reporter called out, "Derek, do you have any message for Michael Thompson?" Derek paused, collecting his thoughts. "I want him to know that he didn't just save my life that day. He gave me back my life. I have children who need their father to be a good man, and thanks to Michael, I now have the chance to be that man." That evening, Derek attended his first group therapy session at a community center in South London. The room was filled with people who had faced similar struggles: unemployment, homelessness, family breakdown, and mental health challenges. Many of them had seen the news coverage of his story. The session leader, Dr. Paul Mitchell, introduced Derek to the group. "Derek has joined us because he's committed to understanding what led him to make such a desperate choice and to building a better future for himself and his family." Derek found himself surrounded by people who understood his struggles without judgment. For the first time in months, he felt like he belonged somewhere. The group included former soldiers dealing with PTSD, single mothers who had lost their homes, and men his age who had seen their careers and families disappear in the economic downturn. As the weeks passed, Derek threw himself into the rehabilitation program with determination. He attended therapy sessions 3 times a week, volunteered at a homeless shelter on weekends, and began taking courses to retrain as an electrician. The structure and support gave him a sense of purpose he had lost months earlier. Michael, meanwhile, had been dealing with his own challenges. The global attention had been overwhelming, with interview requests from major television networks, book publishers wanting him to write his memoir, and speaking agencies offering lucrative contracts. He had turned down most of these opportunities, preferring to focus on his duties and his personal growth. However, he had accepted an invitation to speak at a conference on conflict resolution hosted by the United Nations. His speech about choosing compassion over violence was attended by diplomats, peacekeepers, and humanitarian workers from around the world. "Violence is often born from pain," Michael told the audience. "When we respond to that pain with understanding rather than retribution, we break the cycle that creates more violence." Derek Matthews taught me as much as I taught him that day. He showed me that people are capable of choosing differently when offered hope instead of judgment. The conference organizers were so impressed that they invited Michael to join a new initiative focused on developing nonviolent approaches to conflict resolution in communities around the world. Back in London, Derek was making remarkable progress. His children, 8-year-old Sophie and 10-year-old Jack, had started visiting him again. Their mother, Claire, had been skeptical at first, but Derek's commitment to change had slowly won her over. "Dad," Sophie said during one of their visits to the park, "I saw you on television. The man said you were brave for changing your life." Derek knelt down to her level. "The brave one was Michael Thompson, sweetheart. He showed me how to be brave enough to choose kindness instead of anger." The friendship between Michael and Derek had grown stronger over the months. They met regularly for coffee, and Michael had become something of a mentor to Derek, helping him navigate the challenges of rebuilding his life. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had expected, a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared growth. Their story had become a symbol of hope for people facing their own darkest moments, proving that redemption is possible and that human connection can triumph over the forces that divide us. 2 years after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Derek Matthews stood in front of a mirror adjusting his new work uniform. The bright yellow safety vest and hard hat marked him as a qualified electrician, a goal he had achieved through months of intensive training and study. Today was his first day working for a major construction company that had hired him despite his criminal record. The company's hiring manager, Robert Chun, had been one of millions who watched the footage of Derek's encounter with Michael Thompson. When Derek applied for the job, Robert saw an opportunity to hire someone who had proven their ability to change and grow under difficult circumstances. Derek's transformation had been remarkable, but not easy. The first few months after his sentencing had been particularly challenging as he struggled with depression, guilt, and the practical difficulties of rebuilding his life from nothing. The therapy sessions had been painful as he confronted the anger and despair that had driven him to the palace that day. But, gradually, with the support of his counselor, his rehabilitation group, and Michael Thompson's continued friendship, Derek had begun to see possibilities where he once saw only dead ends. The structure of the program had given him something to focus on beyond his own pain, and the community service work had shown him how good it felt to help others rather than hurt them. Michael Thompson, meanwhile, had made his own significant life changes. The global attention following the incident had opened doors he never could have imagined, but, more importantly, it had clarified his sense of purpose. He had left the ceremonial guard to join a new unit focused on community policing and conflict prevention. His work now involved going into schools and community centers, teaching young people about conflict resolution and helping them understand that violence was never the only option. The skills he had used that day at the palace, empathy, patience, and the ability to see past someone's actions to their underlying pain, had proved invaluable in his new role. On this particular morning, Derek was heading to his first job site when he received a text message from Michael. "Proud of you, mate. 2 years clean, and now starting your career. Fancy meeting for lunch to celebrate." Derek smiled as he typed back, "Absolutely. Still can't believe how far we've both come." Their friendship had deepened over the months, built on shared experiences and mutual respect. Michael had been there for Derek through the difficult early days of rehabilitation, offering encouragement when Derek doubted himself and practical advice when he faced setbacks. Derek, in turn, had taught Michael about resilience and the strength it takes to rebuild a life from scratch. The media attention around their story had eventually died down, but the impact continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. The footage of their encounter had been used in training programs for police officers, security personnel, and military units around the world as an example of how de-escalation could work even in the most dangerous situations. Dr. Amanda Foster had published a paper about the incident in the International Journal of Conflict Resolution, analyzing how Michael's empathetic response had broken the cycle of violence before it could escalate. The paper had been cited in dozens of subsequent studies and had influenced policy changes in several countries regarding the treatment of mentally ill offenders. Derek's children had also benefited from his transformation. Sophie, now 10, and Jack, 12, had watched their father slowly become the man they needed him to be. Their relationship had been rebuilt gradually, with supervised visits evolving into weekend stays and eventually shared custody with their mother Claire. Claire Matthews had been skeptical of Derek's claims of change at first, but his consistent behavior over many months had slowly won her trust. While their marriage could not be repaired, They had developed a functional co-parenting relationship that put their children's needs first. Dad's different now, Jack had told his mother after one of their weekends together. He listens to us, and he doesn't get angry about things anymore. He told us about the man who helped him change, and how important it is to be kind to people even when they're mean to you. The rehabilitation program Derek had completed had become a model for similar initiatives across the country. The combination of mental health treatment, practical skills training, and community service had proven so effective that the government had allocated additional funding to expand it to other regions. Derek's story had inspired other people facing similar challenges to seek help rather than lashing out in desperation. The charity that had housed him after his sentencing reported a significant increase in people voluntarily seeking assistance, many specifically mentioning Derek's example as motivation to change their lives. As Derek arrived at his job site, he was greeted by his new supervisor, Maria Santos, a veteran electrician who had read about his background and chosen to judge him on his skills rather than his past. The construction project was a new community center in East London, designed to provide services for homeless and at-risk individuals. The irony was not lost on Derek that he was now helping to build a facility that might have helped him avoid his darkest moment if it had existed 2 years earlier. As he looked at the blueprints and began planning his work for the day, he thought about how different his life might have been if he had found help before reaching the breaking point. Later that afternoon, Michael finished his shift at the community center where he had been working with a group of teenagers who had been caught up in gang activity. Using the same patient approach he had employed with Derek, Michael had spent weeks building trust with the young people and helping them see alternatives to violence. One of the teenagers, 16-year-old Marcus Williams, approached Michael after the session ended. "Mr. Thompson, I've been thinking about what you said about having choices even when everything seems impossible. How did you know that Derek Mann was going to listen to you instead of hurting you?" Michael considered the question carefully. "I didn't know for certain, Marcus. But I knew that everyone has some goodness inside them, even when they're acting out of pain or anger. Derek wasn't really trying to hurt me. He was trying to hurt the world that had hurt him. When I showed him that I understood his pain instead of fearing his anger, it gave him permission to choose differently." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "My brother was killed in a gang fight last year. I wanted to get revenge, but listening to you made me think maybe there's another way to honor his memory." These were the moments that made Michael's work meaningful. Knowing that the lessons he had learned from his encounter with Derek could help others avoid the same path of violence, and despair gave purpose to everything he had experienced. As evening approached, Michael and Derek met at a small cafe near the Thames, the same place where they had been meeting regularly for the past year. Their conversations had evolved from Derek seeking guidance to two friends sharing the challenges and victories of their daily lives. "How was the first day?" Michael asked as Derek settled into his chair with a cup of coffee. "Brilliant," Derek replied with a grin. "Hard work, but good work. Building something instead of trying to tear something down. And you? How were the kids today?" Michael smiled. "Getting through to them, I think. One of them might be ready to walk away from the gang life. It's slow progress, but it's progress." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching boats pass by on the river. The London skyline sparkled in the fading daylight, the same view they had been sharing for months, but somehow always different. "Michael," Derek said finally, "I've been thinking about what you said that day at the palace about choices. I realize now that even in my worst moment, I had a choice. I could have walked away instead of pulling out that knife. But I'm glad I didn't, because if I had, I never would have met you. I never would have learned that people can change, that kindness is stronger than anger." Michael nodded. "That day changed my life too, Derek. You showed me that compassion isn't just a nice idea. It's a force that can actually transform reality. Every person I work with now, I see your face in theirs. I remember that everyone deserves a chance to choose differently." As they finished their coffee and prepared to part ways, both men reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as one of the worst moments in both of their lives had become the foundation for something beautiful and transformative. Derek's story had proven that redemption was possible even after the darkest choices, while Michael's response had demonstrated that choosing compassion over retribution could break cycles of violence and create healing where none seemed possible. Their friendship stood as a testament to the power of human connection to overcome hatred, despair, and the circumstances that can drive people to desperate acts. In a world often divided by anger and misunderstanding, their story offered hope that understanding and mercy could still prevail. The man who had once attacked a royal guard with a knife had become a skilled tradesman and devoted father. The guard who had chosen compassion over force had found his calling as a peacemaker and mentor. Together, they had created something greater than either could have achieved alone. A living example of how people can choose to heal rather than hurt, to build rather than destroy, and to find light even in the deepest darkness. Their story continued to inspire others around the world, proving that no one is beyond redemption, and that sometimes the most powerful response to violence is not more violence, but the radical act of treating one's attacker as a human being deserving of compassion and hope.